The German engineer barely saw Emma walk into the machine room before he fired off in front of everyone. "You with that beat-up toolbox aren't getting anywhere near the compressor, sweetheart. You'll break what's already broken." The operators chuckle under their breath. The factory owner looks away, embarrassed. Emma grips the toolbox tight, the only thing she inherited from her late husband, as she stares down the metal beast that nobody's been able to fix for 8 months. But when the oldest operator in the plant whispers to her, "Ma'am, there's an old inspection cover in there that nobody's touched in about 40 years. A strange silence falls over the room. Something nobody expected is about to happen, and she's the only one who sees it coming. Hey, don't miss out. Subscribe to Engines of Hope and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I really want to know. Emma Sullivan, a 30-year-old widow and industrial mechanic, works as a contracted maintenance technician for heavy machinery in the Rust Belt region around Cleveland, Ohio. She learned everything she knows from her late husband, Danny Sullivan, who worked for 20 years as head mechanic at the old Lakeside steel plant before he was killed in a car accident 2 years ago, leaving Emma alone at 28 with nothing but his knowledge, his worn-out toolbox, and a mountain of grief. Emma spent her entire marriage by Danny's side, flipping through his yellowed technical notebooks and maintenance manuals that he kept like treasure, memorizing hydraulic and pneumatic schematics for equipment that many modern factories don't even remember exist anymore. When he died, she took his place in the field, not because she wanted to, but because she had to survive. She supports the modest house where she lives alone now, working double shifts just to keep up with the mortgage Danny left behind. On a Tuesday morning, Emma is sent by the maintenance company where she works to answer an emergency call at Hartwell Textiles, a traditional family-owned textile mill that's on the brink of financial collapse. Hartwell Textiles, founded in 1951 by the grandfather of the current owner, faces a devastating crisis. Their industrial German Kaiser air compressor, a colossal 40-year-old machine that powers the 200 looms in the factory, breaks down every single day and has been doing so for 8 months. Robert Hartwell, 52 years old, third generation of the family running the company, is desperate. He's invested $480,000 in specialized consultants. He brought in technicians from Pittsburgh and even from Chicago. 6 months ago, he hired a mechanical engineer from Europe, Victor Kraus, 38 years old, trained in Germany, who charges $35,000 a month in salary. Nothing has worked. Production stops daily, million-dollar contracts are being cancelled, and the factory has accumulated $2.8 million in losses. Robert feels the weight of disappointing 3 generations of family history and 180 workers who depend on the company. When Emma arrives at the factory, wearing her grease-stained coveralls and carrying an old toolbox, she's met with absolute disdain by Victor, who immediately assumes she's a cleaning lady or some lost assistant. He intercepts her at the entrance to the compressor area and, in front of a dozen operators, mocks her with cruel sarcasm, asking if she came to mop the floor or pick up her mechanic boyfriend. The humiliation intensifies when Robert Hartwell appears, and Victor, wanting to impress the boss, turns the situation into a spectacle. He questions out loud how a serious company could send a woman to solve a problem that highly qualified engineers couldn't figure out. Emma tries to explain that she was sent by the contracted maintenance company, but Victor interrupts her repeatedly, asking complex technical questions to expose her as incompetent. To his growing frustration, Emma answers every question correctly about pneumatic systems, pressure differentials, and preventive maintenance, citing exact technical specifications for the Kaiser BSD-75 model. Irritated that she knows more than he expected, Victor changes strategy and physically blocks her from approaching the compressor, claiming she could cause irreversible damage to equipment worth over $1 million. Robert, although clearly uncomfortable with Victor's cruelty, is too desperate to risk more problems and orders Emma to wait while Victor makes another diagnostic attempt. During the humiliating wait, she briefly talks with Mr. Dominguez, the oldest operator in the factory, who was working there when the compressor was installed in 1984. He casually mentions that back in the day, Mr. Werner, the German who installed the machine, used to work on some covers that nobody even knows exist today. While Victor and his team perform a theatrical and useless analysis of the compressor, Emma has an epiphany. She remembers a specific manual that Danny kept, an original Kaiser BSD from the 1980s with instructions in German and English. That night she goes home, finds the manual among Danny's things in the garage where she keeps everything exactly as he left it, and discovers something crucial. The old Kaiser models had a secondary inspection cover on the distribution manifold that needed to be checked every 6 months to drain accumulated condensation. If this cover was forgotten, pressure would gradually drop, causing exactly the symptoms the factory was experiencing. The next day, Emma returns to the factory without being called, bringing Danny's yellowed, stained manual. She finds Robert in his office, surrounded by company directors in an emergency meeting where they're discussing closing the factory. With a courage that surprises even herself, Emma interrupts the meeting and, in front of everyone, including a furious Victor, presents her theory. She shows the old manual, translates the German instructions, and explains technically how the forgotten cover could be causing progressive pressure loss in the system. Victor tries to discredit her, arguing that he already checked all the components, but Emma challenges him. If she's wrong, she agrees to never set foot in the factory again. If she's right, he must publicly admit his incompetence. Robert, with nothing left to lose, authorizes the inspection. Emma guides the group to the side of the compressor, to an area covered by decades of dust and industrial paint. Using the manual's instructions, she locates a circular cover about 6 inches in diameter that nobody had touched in probably 40 years. When she opens the cover with a special wrench, she brought one of Danny's old tools. Quarts of dark, thick, condensed oil pour out, along with accumulated water and metal residue. The pressure gauge, which had chronically oscillated between 87 and 100 psi, immediately jumps to 145 psi, the system's nominal pressure. For the first time in 8 months, the compressor runs at full capacity without overheating. The silence in the compressor room is absolute. Mr. Dominguez starts crying, remembering Mr. Werner and the original installation. The directors look at Victor, who is pale and speechless. Robert, emotional, formally apologizes to Emma in front of everyone, acknowledging that he allowed her to be humiliated because of prejudice. He fires Victor immediately and offers Emma a permanent contract as Chief Preventive Maintenance Consultant, with a salary 3 times her current one. But Emma proposes something different. She accepts the position if the company creates a technical training program for young people in the region, especially women, teaching industrial maintenance using old manuals and traditional knowledge that's being lost. 18 months later, Hartwell Textiles has not only recovered financially, but has become a reference in industrial maintenance. Emma runs the Danny Sullivan Technical Training Center, named in honor of her late husband, where she teaches young apprentices everything Danny taught her, showing his historical notebooks, keeping his memory alive through the knowledge he left behind. The factory hasn't had a single unplanned shutdown since Emma took over maintenance. Robert transformed the company culture, valuing practical knowledge as much as diplomas, and the story of the forgotten cover became legend in the industrial region around Cleveland. Victor, after months of unemployment and reflection, sent a letter asking Emma for forgiveness, admitting that his arrogance masked deep insecurity. The story proves that sometimes the greatest solutions come from humble knowledge, kept in yellowed manuals and in the memory of those who truly understand machines, and that underestimating someone by their appearance is the most expensive mistake a company can make. Robert looked at Emma for a long moment. He saw a woman of 30, average height, slim, with her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing worn coveralls that had seen better days. He saw the old dented toolbox she carried, covered in faded stickers, and then he looked at Victor, a man of 38, imposing, wearing expensive clothes, a German degree, who spoke with authority and confidence. For Robert, the choice seemed obvious. "Ma'am," Robert said, and his voice was tired, defeated. "I appreciate you coming, but look, it's nothing personal. It's just that we're in a very delicate situation here. We've already lost almost $3 million. This compressor is the heart of the entire factory. I just can't risk it." He paused, and Emma saw that he was being sincere, but that didn't make the words any less painful. Engineer Krauss has been working on this problem for months. He knows this equipment like nobody else. I think it's better if you wait while he does another check. Maybe later, if we need a second opinion. The sentence hung in the air, and everyone understood the message. She wasn't welcome. She was just a formality, someone the contracted company sent because they had a contractual obligation, but nobody took her seriously. Emma felt her legs weaken, but she didn't let it show. She just nodded, her throat too tight to speak, and stepped back a few paces. Victor, on the other hand, was radiant. He had won that battle without even trying hard, and now he had an audience to impress. "All right," Victor announced, clapping his hands once like a professor about to give a lecture. "Let's do a complete system check. I want everyone to pay attention, because this is how real industrial diagnostics is done." He gestured to two factory technicians. "You two, bring the measurement equipment I left in the lab. We're going to check differential pressure, operating temperature, volumetric flow." While Victor orchestrated that technical show, Emma stood leaning against a wall, holding her toolbox, feeling smaller with every passing minute. The factory operators glanced at her from time to time, some with pity, others with curiosity. But nobody said anything. Their silence was complicit. And you know what hurts the most? It's not the person who humiliates you directly. It's the crowd that watches and does nothing. That's when an older gentleman, maybe 65, thin and slightly stooped, approached her. He limped slightly on his left leg and had hands calloused from decades of manual labor. It was Mr. Dominguez, the oldest operator at Hartwell Textiles. He'd been working there since 1979. He'd seen the factory in its golden days. He'd known 3 generations of the Hartwell family. "Don't pay attention to those men, ma'am," Mr. Dominguez said quietly, so only she could hear. "I've seen plenty of technicians full of degrees who couldn't fix anything. A degree doesn't teach a person to feel the machine, to understand what it's asking for." He looked toward the giant compressor, that German metal monster that dominated the room. "That compressor right there. Oh boy, ma'am. I was here when they installed it in 1984. It was Mr. Werner who brought it from Germany, a short, chubby German engineer who spoke English with a thick accent, but understood machines like nobody's business." Emma looked at the compressor, and then at Mr. Dominguez, paying real attention for the first time since she'd arrived. "Mr. Werner," Dominguez continued, his eyes lost in memories from 40 years ago. "He used to spend hours working on that machine. Climbed ladders, opened covers we didn't even know existed, cleaned some things, tightened others. He used to say German machines were like people. They needed care, attention in the right places." Dominguez shook his head. "But after he left, no other German ever came back. The new technicians, the ones who show up today, they only know how to look at computers, push buttons. Nobody opens the old covers anymore. Nobody remembers they exist." Those words kept echoing in Emma's head. Old covers, forgotten places. She felt something stir in her memory, something familiar, but she couldn't quite access it yet. Meanwhile, Victor was in his element. He put on a technical show that lasted almost 2 hours. He connected sensors, measured pressures, checked temperatures, analyzed vibrations, had technicians write numbers on clipboards, consulted a laptop with compressor diagrams. And the whole time, he made a point of narrating each step out loud, using complex technical terms, showing off for Robert and anyone else who was watching. And you know what happened after all that? Absolutely nothing. Victor didn't find anything wrong. The measurements were within acceptable parameters. Temperature slightly elevated but not critical. Pressure fluctuating but not alarming. He concluded, with the unshakable confidence of someone who won't admit they're lost, that it was probably an intermittent problem with electrical grid fluctuations, and that he would make fine adjustments to the control system. Robert listened to all of that with an expression of pure desperation disguised as hope. He wanted to believe, needed to believe, because if not even Victor could solve it, what would be left? Closing the factory. The end of 3 generations of work. 180 families out on the street. When Victor finally finished his diagnosis, it was almost 11 in the morning. He turned to Robert and said with that professional smile, "Mr. Hartwell, I'm going to implement the corrections I identified. Should be resolved by tomorrow." Then, as an afterthought, he looked in Emma's direction and said loud enough for her to hear, "Good thing we didn't let someone without experience touch the equipment. Could have caused irreversible damage." Emma felt her cheeks burn with renewed humiliation. She'd been there for 5 hours, treated like furniture, like an incompetent child, like someone who had no right to exist in that space. And worst of all, she hadn't even had a chance to prove her worth. She was judged, condemned, and discarded by her appearance. When she finally left the factory, the sun was high and harsh. She took the bus back, sat in the back, and it was only when she got home that she broke down. She sat in Danny's old recliner, the one she still couldn't bring herself to move, and cried. She cried for the humiliation, for the loneliness, for the fact that Danny wasn't there to tell her it would be okay, to hold her, to remind her that she knew her stuff. She looked at the frame photo on the mantel, their wedding day, both of them covered in grease because they'd spent the morning fixing her dad's truck and barely had time to clean up for the ceremony. Danny was laughing in the picture. He was always laughing. "I wish you were here," she whispered to the empty room. "You'd know exactly what to do." Later that night, Emma couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the compressor, about Mr. Dominguez's words about the old covers, about Mr. Werner's obsession with forgotten places. And suddenly, like lightning, she remembered something. She jumped out of bed, went to the garage, Danny's sacred space that she'd left untouched, and started looking through the old boxes he kept on the shelves. Boxes full of notebooks, manuals, technical diagrams from decades past. And then she found it, an old manual with a faded blue cover, written in German and English. The title read, Kaiser BSD-75 Preventive Maintenance Manual, 1982 edition. The paper was yellowed, stained with oil and grease, with handwritten notes in the margins, Danny's handwriting. She recognized it immediately, felt her heart clench at the sight of his familiar scrawl. This manual had been Danny's since before they met. He'd worked with similar compressors at the steel plant. Emma sat on the cold garage floor, turned on the work lamp, and read page by page, line by line. It was 3 in the morning when she found it. On page 47, there was a diagram of the pneumatic distribution system, and there, highlighted with a red circle made in pen by Danny, was a secondary cover on the distribution manifold. The description, translated from German, read, "Attention! Secondary inspection cover must be checked every 6 months for drainage of condensation and residue. Failure to perform this maintenance will result in progressive loss of system pressure." Emma's heart raced. That was it. It had to be. If nobody had checked that cover in 40 years, the accumulated condensation would perfectly explain the symptoms. Fluctuating pressure, overheating, daily performance drops. It was so simple, so obvious, but only to someone who knew old equipment, original manuals, procedures that the new generation of technicians had forgotten. She spent the rest of the night studying that manual, memorizing every detail, every instruction. And when the sun rose, Emma Sullivan had a mission. She was going back to that factory, and this time she wasn't going to let anyone stop her from doing her job. The next morning, Emma woke up at 5, as always, but this time with a different determination burning in her chest. She showered, put on her clean coveralls, the least stained one she had, grabbed Danny's toolbox, and most importantly, put the yellowed Kaiser BSD-75 manual in her backpack. Before leaving, she stopped at the photo on the mantel and touched Danny's face through the glass. "Wish me luck, baby," she whispered. "I'm going to make you proud today." When Emma arrived at Hartwell Textiles, it was 7:30 in the morning. The security guard at the gate recognized her from the day before and frowned. "Hey, Mom! Weren't you let go yesterday?" "I need to speak with Mr. Hartwell," Emma replied, her voice firm. "It's urgent. It's about the compressor." The guard hesitated, but something in that woman's determination made him pick up the phone and call administration. 10 minutes later, he came back with a confused expression. "Mr. Hartwell's in an emergency meeting with the directors, but he said you can go up. Conference room, 2nd floor." Emma's heart was beating so hard she could hear her pulse in her ears. She climbed the stairs. The elevator was broken, another symbol of the factory's problems, and arrived at a frosted glass door with a plaque reading "Conference Room." Through the glass, she could see shadows of several people seated around a table. She took 3 deep breaths, like Danny had taught her when she was nervous about anything. "Breathe, Em. 3 deep ones. Fear leaves, courage stays." Emma knocked on the door. Silence fell inside. Then a tired voice said, "Come in." When she opened the door, the scene she found was heartbreaking. Robert Hartwell sat at the head of the table, and you've never seen a man so destroyed. He had deep, dark circles under his eyes, unshaven stubble, his tie loosened. Around the table were 5 other people. 3 older men who appeared to be directors, a woman in a suit who Emma later learned was the company's lawyer, and of course Victor Kraus, with his straight posture and superior expression. On the table, spread out, were documents, spreadsheets, graphs, and on the whiteboard on the wall, someone had written numbers in red. Accumulated losses, $247,000 cancelled contracts, 7 projected closure, 60 days. When everyone saw Emma standing in the doorway in her coveralls with her backpack, the reaction was shock. Victor was the first to react, and as you can imagine, it wasn't kind. "What the—" He stood up from his chair, indignant. "Mr. Hartwell, what is this person doing here, in a private board meeting?" Robert looked at Emma, completely lost. "Ma'am, Emma, isn't it? Look, as you can see, we're in a very delicate situation here. This isn't the time." "Mr. Hartwell," Emma interrupted, and her voice came out louder and firmer than she expected. "Please, give me just 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes of your time. I know what's wrong with the compressor." The silence that fell over the room was absolute. One of the older directors, a gentleman with white hair, let out a dry, humorless laugh. "My God, Robert, how far have we fallen? Now anyone who walks in here says they can fix our problem." Victor seized the opportunity and practically exploded. "This is outrageous, Mr. Hartwell. I can't believe we're wasting time on this." He pointed at Emma with contempt. "I checked that compressor completely yesterday, did every measurement possible. And now this woman shows up saying she knows more than I do?" He laughed, but it was a bitter, offended laugh. "Frankly, this is an insult to my education, my experience, my work." But Emma didn't back down. She stepped forward, took the old manual from her backpack, and placed it on the table, right in front of Robert. The manual landed with a dull thud, raising a small cloud of dust. Everyone looked at that worn book, yellowed, stained with oil. "This," Emma said, her voice trembling but determined, "is the original Kaiser BSD 75 manual, 1982 edition. My husband kept it for 20 years. He worked with compressors just like this one at Lakeside Steel." She opened the manual to the page she'd marked with a piece of paper. "Here on page 47 there's a maintenance instruction that I bet no modern technician knows about. It's about a secondary inspection cover on the distribution manifold. This cover needs to be checked every 6 months to drain condensation. If it's forgotten—" "This is ridiculous," Victor interrupted, red with rage. "I know that compressor inside and out. There's no forgotten secondary cover. This is—" "Let her finish." The voice came from the lawyer, a woman of about 45 named Ms. Richardson, who until then had remained silent. She looked at Emma with a different expression. Not pity, not disdain, but genuine curiosity. "Continue, Emma. Finish your reasoning." Emma looked at Ms. Richardson with gratitude and continued, now reading directly from the manual, translating the German parts. "If maintenance on this cover is neglected, there will be progressive accumulation of condensed oil, water, and metal residue in the distribution chamber. This will result in gradual loss of system pressure, compressor overheating, and intermittent failures that will intensify over time." She raised her eyes to Robert. "Those are exactly the symptoms you've been having for 8 months, aren't they?" Robert leaned forward, showing real interest for the first time. "And where is this cover? Why hasn't any technician found it until today?" "Because," Emma explained, "it's in a lateral position on the compressor, covered by decades of dust and industrial paint. Modern technicians only look at the obvious points: control panel, main filters, safety valves. This cover is from an older generation of equipment. The new manuals don't even mention it anymore." Victor practically shouted, "This is absurd. It's impossible. I measured all the pressures yesterday, every point in the system." "You measured?" Emma said, turning to face him for the first time. "The external pressures. But if the internal distribution chamber is full of residue, the external measurements won't show the real problem. The system tries to compensate for internal pressure loss. That's why it works for a few hours before going into overload and shutting down." The silence in the room was different now. It wasn't disdain anymore. It was tense, nervous attention. One of the directors asked, his voice hesitant, "And if you're right, if you open this cover and find this problem, the compressor will go back to working normally?" "Yes," Emma replied without hesitation. "Immediately." Victor looked around the table, feeling control of the situation slipping through his fingers. "Mr. Hartwell, this is crazy. We can't base important decisions on theories from a person without formal training using a 40-year-old manual. What if she's wrong? What if she opens something wrong and damages the equipment for good?" That's when Emma did something that surprised even herself. She looked directly at Victor and said, her voice calm but cutting, "I'll make a deal with you, Engineer Krauss. If I'm wrong, if I open this cover and don't find exactly what I described, I'll never set foot in this factory again. I'll never work in industrial maintenance again. I'll give up my career." She paused and her gaze was steel. "But if I'm right, you admit in front of everyone here that you were wrong, that you judged me by my appearance, that your pride and arrogance blinded you to the simplest solution. Can you imagine the tension in that room? It was like the air had become heavy, dense. Victor was pale, caught between the humiliation of refusing the challenge and the terror of accepting it. Robert looked from one to the other, desperation and hope fighting in his face. "Please," Robert said, and his voice broke a little. "Please, for God's sake. This factory is everything I have, everything 3 generations of my family built. If there's a chance, even a small one." He looked at Emma, and for the first time she saw respect in that gaze. "Mom, you seem sure of what you're saying. I'm going to trust you. Let's go to the compressor." Victor tried to protest one more time, but Miss Richardson cut him off. "Enough, Victor. Either you accept her challenge or you stay quiet." And so that whole group, Robert, the three directors, Miss Richardson, Victor and Emma, went down to the compressor room. Word spread through the factory in minutes, and when they got there, about 20 people had already gathered. Operators, technicians, supervisors. Mr. Dominguez was there too, his eyes wide with expectation. Emma approached the giant compressor, that German metal monster that dominated the room. She walked around it slowly, checking the manual, until she stopped on the right side, in an area covered by layers of blue industrial paint, decades of dust and hardened grease. There, almost invisible, was a circular protrusion about 6 inches in diameter. "It's here," she said, her voice firm. She opened her toolbox, that old dented box that Victor had mocked, and took out a special wrench, an old tool that Danny used. She cleaned the area with a rag, revealing a circular cover with 6 hex screws. "Mr. Hartwell," Emma said, looking at him, "I'm going to open this now. If I'm wrong, you can sue me. But if I'm right—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. Robert just nodded, too tense to speak. Emma started loosening the screws. They were seized from decades of oxidation, and she had to use all her strength. One by one, the screws gave way. When she loosened the last one, she held the cover with both hands and looked back at the silent crowd. "Step back a bit," she said. "Liquid's going to come out." And then she pulled the cover off. My friends, what happened next was something nobody there would ever forget. A stream of black, thick, foul-smelling condensed oil began pouring from the opening. Quarts and quarts of dark liquid mixed with dirty water and metal residue. The smell was horrible, burned oil and oxidized metal. The liquid formed a puddle on the floor, running toward the industrial drains. Emma held the cover aside, letting all that filth drain out. And then it happened. The main pressure gauge on the compressor, the one showing system pressure that had been oscillating for months between 87 and 100 psi, started climbing. 100 psi, 110, 120, 130, and finally stabilized at 145 psi, the system's nominal pressure. The compressor, which normally worked making a strained, irregular noise, suddenly purred smooth and steady. The temperature, which always climbed dangerously, began to drop. The silence in the room was sepulchral. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. Everyone stared at that pressure gauge like it was a miracle. And then Mr. Dominguez started crying. Tears streamed down the wrinkled face of that old worker as he looked at the machine running perfectly for the first time in months. "Mr. Werner," he whispered, his voice choked. "You were right, sir, the old covers, the forgotten covers." One of the directors let out a laugh of pure relief and disbelief. My God in heaven, she did it! The woman did it!" Type respect in the comments if you believe talent has no gender or appearance, and all eyes turned to Victor Kraus. And you know what they saw? A completely destroyed man. He was white as paper, his hands trembling, unable to speak. Because at that moment, in front of all those workers, technicians, directors, his boss, he had been exposed. All his arrogance, all his pride, all his contempt for that woman. All of it had been revealed for what it really was, ignorance disguised as superiority. My dear friends, now let me tell you the ending of this story, because there's no point in having justice, having recognition, if things don't really change, if they don't leave a legacy that lasts, that transforms. And that's exactly what happened. 2 years after that historic day in the compressor room, Hartwell Textiles was completely transformed. The factory not only recovered financially, it became the most profitable in the region. You know why? Because since Emma took over maintenance, there hasn't been a single unplanned shutdown. Not one. The looms ran without interruption. Contracts came back. New clients appeared. The company's reputation was restored and even surpassed the glory days of Robert's grandfather. But the most beautiful part What really moves my heart is what happened in the warehouse next to the factory. Robert kept his promise and did more than he promised. He renovated an entire warehouse, equipped it with restored old machines, bought tools, installed workbenches, created classrooms, and there the Danny Sullivan Technical Training Center was born. Danny Sullivan, that man whose worn-out toolbox and yellowed notebooks saved a factory, finally got the recognition he deserved, even if he wasn't there to see it. Every day, Monday through Friday, Emma arrived at 8 in the morning. She was received with respect and affection by the students. She'd sit in front of the class and teach lessons about hydraulic systems, pneumatics, about how to read old diagrams, about the philosophy of preventive maintenance that Danny had taught her through all those years together. Danny's yellowed notebooks, the ones Emma used to flip through while sitting next to him in the garage, were now studied by dozens of young people. She had 15 students in the first class, in the second class, 40. In the third, 80 young people were on the waiting list. And you know what was most beautiful? Half the students were women, young women of 18, 19, 20 years old, coming from poor neighborhoods in Cleveland and surrounding cities, who had never thought about working in mechanics, who never imagined they could understand engines, compressors, electrical systems. But there they were, wearing coveralls, holding tools, learning that talent has no gender, that capability isn't measured by appearance, that knowledge doesn't require an expensive degree. It requires dedication, humility, and the will to learn. Emma, at 32, was the technical director of Hartwell Textiles and coordinator of the training center. She now earned $180,000 a year. Robert had given her raises twice in recognition of her exceptional work. But the money, as important as it was, wasn't what mattered most to Emma. What mattered were the young women who came to thank her, crying because they'd gotten their first job. The young men who hugged pictures of Danny on the wall, calling him the founder. The companies in the region that called asking for recommendations of technicians trained at the center. Every graduate who walked out those doors carried a piece of Danny with them. His knowledge lived on. His legacy grew. And in her quiet moments, Emma would look at the framed photo she kept on her desk, their wedding day, both covered in grease, and smile. "We did it, baby," she'd whisper. "We did it together." The story of Emma and the forgotten cover spread throughout the industrial region around Cleveland, Pittsburgh, throughout the Midwest. Robert told anyone who would listen. He completely changed the company culture. Now he valued practical knowledge as much as diplomas. Hired based on capability, not appearance. Created an environment where respect was law. And Victor, my friends, even Victor has his place in this story. After months unemployed, months suffering with his destroyed reputation, months facing the shame of what he'd done, he finally had the courage to do something. On a Thursday afternoon, he appeared at the gate of Hartwell Textiles and asked to speak with Emma. She could have refused. She had every right. But she agreed. Victor walked into that compressor room where everything had happened, and he was different, thinner, grey hair he didn't have 2 years ago, sunken eyes. He was holding a handwritten letter, his hands trembling. "Emma," he said, his voice hoarse. "I wrote this 50 times before I could put on paper what I really feel. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness. I know what I did was unforgivable. I humiliated you, disrespected you, tried to destroy your chance out of pure pride." He extended the letter. "I spent 2 years reflecting. I went to therapy. I understood that my arrogance hid a deep insecurity. I was so afraid of not being good enough that I attacked anyone who threatened my illusion of superiority." Emma took the letter and read it in silence. 3 pages of sincere apology, recognition of his mistakes, gratitude for the lesson she'd unintentionally taught him. "I accept your apology," Emma said finally, "not because you deserve it, but because I don't want to carry anger in my heart. But Victor, I need you to understand something. You don't owe me anything. You owe the next people who cross your path. You owe treating them with respect, regardless of who they are, where they came from, what they look like." Victor nodded, his eyes wet. "I will. I promise I will." And he did. Victor got a job at a smaller company with a much smaller salary, but he worked with humility for the first time in his life. At the graduation ceremony for the third class of the Danny Sullivan Technical Training Center, there were 300 people in the Hartwell Textiles courtyard: students, families, business people from the region, city officials. Emma stood at the podium, Danny's photo projected on the screen behind her. She gave an emotional speech about how a forgotten cover on an old compressor had changed so many lives. "This story," she said, her voice firm but emotional, "isn't about me. It's about my husband Danny, who kept knowledge when everyone said the old ways don't matter anymore. It's about Mr. Dominguez, who remembered the details that mattered. It's about all of you, young people here, proving that talent has no age, no gender, no social class." She looked at the audience, at all those young faces full of future. "And it's about a lesson I hope nobody here ever forgets. Never, ever judge a person by their appearance. Because the most important solution, the most valuable knowledge, might be in the most unlikely person." She paused, looking at Danny's smiling face on the screen. "And sometimes the people who teach us the most are the ones who aren't here anymore to see what their love and knowledge built." The audience erupted in applause. And so, my dear friends, this story ends. A story about a widow who was humiliated but didn't give up. About a husband who left treasure in old notebooks. About a forgotten cover that taught us that sometimes the greatest solutions come from the most unlikely places. And about the fact that respect, humility, and recognition of human value are more important than any degree, any title, any certification. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to Cheetah, Engines of Hope. Hit that like button and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I want to know. And if you know someone who's ever been underestimated, share this video with them. Sometimes we all need a reminder that our worth isn't measured by what others see on the outside. Until next time.